My name is Aurora Lane, and I'm 17 years old. I used to think I understood what pain meant, the pain of tremors that stole my balance of medications, that stole my mind of hospital lights, that stole my sleep. But nothing compared to the pain of realizing the people who gave me life wanted to take it back. I'm a high school senior, though. Most days I feel older than my teachers. Illness ages you faster than time ever could. Tonight, as the rain falls outside this window, I'm telling you my story. Because if you're listening, if your heart beats faster, reading these words, then maybe you too know what it's like to be abandoned and still choose to survive. My name is Aurora Lane, and I have spent 17 years learning the anatomy of pain. The first lesson came when I was 12. It started as a tremor in my right hand during piano practice, a small flicker of rebellion my body insisted was nothing. My mother, Margaret Lane, told me to hold the keys tighter. My father, Charles Lane, told me to stop fidgeting. But by the end of that year, the tremors had spread to my legs, small earthquakes under my skin. I learned to swallow my terror with water and pills to hide it behind straight A's and polite smiles. By 14, the cane became my shadow. I carried it everywhere, school hallways echoing with its clicks, hospital corridors, too silent for a child to walk alone. On the day my friends were at cheer practice, I sat under flickering fluorescent lights, letting strangers attach wires to my scalp to measure the malfunctioning currents of my brain. They said it was a neurological condition, degenerative, progressive, cruel. At 16, I learned a different kind of pain, the quiet, seeping ache of watching your parents' love die in their eyes. Every hospital bill stacked between us like bricks in a prison. Every insurance denial was a silent death knell. I stopped asking to go to school events, stopped asking for birthday cakes, stopped asking for anything. And yet in my secret heart, I still thought I was loved. Until that night. The rain came down like judgment, slashing against the car windows as Charles drove in silence. Margaret stared straight ahead, face pale in the lightning flicker, my head lolled against the window drugged with painkillers. My bones felt like glass, my veins burned with fatigue. "Where are we going?" I whispered. My voice sounded small, a child's voice, but I was no child. I was a dying animal, and I think they saw that. Neither answered. The car turned onto an unfamiliar road. Gravel crunched under the tires, the trees pressed in black and silent. The smell of wet earth filled the car when they opened my door. "Get out," Charles said, just like that. No tremor in his voice, no regret. I tried to stand, but my legs collapsed beneath me. Cold mud swallowed my knees. I clutched the car door handle, desperate. "Please, please, Mom, Dad, don't leave me." I saw Margaret's eyes finally meet mine, and in them was nothing. No anger, no sadness, just exhaustion. "You're a burden, Aurora," she said softly, as though explaining the weather. "We're sorry. Sorry, the final cruelty." The door slammed. The car pulled away, red taillights fading into the storm. I was alone. Alone with the rain, the trembling, the certainty that I was not meant to see the dawn. Time blurred. The world narrowed to cold pain, darkness. But when death came for me, it did not come in the form of angels or ghosts. It came in the form of headlights piercing the rain and the face I had dreamed of for years. Jason, my brother, who had vanished when I was 8. Back then, he was 17 strong and defiant, the only one who fought for my treatments when Dad refused. I remember the night he left there shouting, shook the walls, the front door slammed so hard the glass shattered. I cried myself to sleep, bracelet of colored threads he made for me tight around my wrist. Now 9 years later, he knelt in the mud beside me, eyes the same storm-dark blue I remembered. "I've got you, Aurora," he whispered, lifting me into his arms. "I've got you." And I broke open in a flood of sobs, pain, relief, betrayal. The scent of his flannel shirt, the warmth of his chest against my frozen cheek. "You came back," I choked out. "You came back for me." I never stopped looking, he said. In his cabin, hidden deep in the woods, I learned how he'd spent those lost years. After Dad kicked him out for daring to offer his college savings for my treatment, Jason was homeless. He slept in cars, construction sites, learned to fix engines and grow food just to stay alive. He built this sanctuary with his own hands, off-grid, safe, waiting for the day he could bring me here. But it wasn't just kindness that kept him away. There was a darkness to my story I had never known. Neurovance. The company name was stamped across files Jason retrieved from storage units my parents kept under false names. In my mother's old journal, her handwriting trembled. Robert signed the final paperwork today. $50,000 deposited. They say it's for treatment trials. But what if something goes wrong? God forgive me, I wasn't just sick, I was sold. At 3 years old, my parents enrolled me in an experimental neurological trial to save their drowning finances. The treatments caused damage that no doctor could reverse. I was the living evidence of their betrayal, and when the symptoms worsened, they chose to erase me. Jason showed me footage from his dashboard camera that night, their car pulling away, leaving me slumped in the mud. Proof of abandonment. Proof that the girl they called a burden was really their victim. But darkness runs deeper than even betrayal. Neurovance sent men to find me, to silence me before the truth destroyed them. They threatened Jason tried to sabotage his truck, threatened Mira Chen, the ex-military medic who now treated my failing body with quiet dignity. They sent me letters. You were never meant to survive. Stop digging. I did not stop. I dug deeper. When Jason was arrested on false charges, I went public. I sat before cameras, trembling but unbroken, and told the world my story. I stood from my wheelchair legs shaking like leaves in winter and said, "This is what fighting back looks like. This is what they couldn't take from me. My will to stand up." People watched. They listened. They believed. Neurovance's stocks collapsed. Lawsuits mounted. My parents were indicted, stripped of everything they once loved more than me. And now a year later, I stand on the porch of our foundation, Wells Foundation for Medical Ethics and Survivor Support, the place Jason and I built with settlement funds. Here we house children like me. We teach them that their lives are not commodities. That pain does not diminish their worth. That survival is not the end. It is only the beginning. Some nights I stand outside cane in hand looking up at the stars. Someone once left me on the side of the road to die. Now I am the one changing lives, bringing down empires, and teaching others that no one is too broken to matter. This is my story. This is Aurora Lane, and I am still here. The rain fell like knives against the car windows, slicing through the suffocating silence that pressed against my ears. My father, Charles Lane, drove with a grip so tight his knuckles blanched, white eyes locked on the dark, endless road ahead. My mother, Margaret Lane, sat motionless beside him, her lips pressed into a thin, colorless line, her eyes staring blankly at the streaks of water racing down the glass. In the back seat, I trembled, not from the cold, seeping through the thin fabric of my sweater, but from the tremors rippling relentlessly through my weakened limbs. Each jolt sent pain shooting up my spine like lightning. My head lolled against the seat as I struggled to keep my eyes open, the painkillers fogging my mind, turning everything into a hazy, shifting nightmare. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice cracking raw from crying earlier, fatigue wrapping around my words like chains. Silence. Only the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers replied, slicing the storm into ragged frames of darkness and light. Neither of them turned. Neither of them spoke. The car veered off the main road tires, crunching onto a narrow, unmarked path, swallowed by trees and shadows. Branches scraped along the sides, skeletal fingers clawing at the metal as if trying to warn me to hold me back from what waited ahead. My heart slammed against my rib cage, a panicked bird trapped and fluttering against cold steel bars. Finally, the car rolled to a stop on a gravel shoulder. There were no houses here. No lights, no life. Only the storm raging above the wind, howling through twisted branches like a mourning chorus. "Get out." Charles Lane said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were reading instructions from a manual. I blinked at him, confusion and fear clawing up my throat. What do you mean, Dad? It's raining. Please, I'm cold. Take your bag." His grip on the wheel tightened further. "Get out." I looked down to see a small backpack resting against my leg. I hadn't packed it. They had. The realization settled over me like ice spreading through my veins until even my shivers felt numb. "Please." My voice broke into a whisper as I reached out a trembling hand to my mother. "Mom, don't let him do this. I'm your daughter." She turned to look at me, then her eyes as empty as her voice. "You're a burden, Aurora," she said softly, as if she were simply noting the rain's chill, as if those words didn't slice me open, exposing bone and marrow beneath my paper-thin hope. The door opened. Rain and wind tore into the car, stinging my face like punishment. Charles Lane's hand wrapped around my thin arm, his fingers bruising my skin as he pulled me out. My legs buckled immediately, pain screaming up my spine as I collapsed into the mud. I cried out, but the storm devoured my voice. He dropped the backpack beside me. "Goodbye," he said, and just like that, he turned away. He didn't look at me again, didn't see his daughter curled in the mud, her frail body racked with uncontrollable tremors. Didn't see the tears streaming down her hollow cheeks, mixing with the rain until there was no difference between grief and sky. He got back in the car, closed the door, and drove away. I lay there clutching my useless legs to my chest as the taillights disappeared into the darkness. The roar of the storm swallowed the sound of the engine until only my ragged breathing remained. My teeth chattered so hard it felt like my skull would splinter. Every shiver sent knives of pain tearing through my spine, stealing what little strength remained. My thin sweater clung to me, soaked through in minutes the freezing fabric outlining every protruding bone. Mud oozed into every crease of my skin, gritty and cold. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered, because they were gone. They left me. Their sick, broken daughter they once rocked to sleep, tucked in with bedtime songs and butterfly kisses, now discarded like trash at the side of a forgotten road. The tremors worsened. My body twitched and jerked uncontrollably. Lightning tore open the sky, revealing twisted black branches writhing like serpents above me. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled my bones, but the only thing I felt was the cold. The deep, soul-stealing cold seeping into my marrow, whispering that this was how I would die. Alone, shaking, unwanted. I closed my eyes and let the rain wash over me, each drop striking like judgment. Somewhere far away, I thought I heard an engine approaching. Headlights, maybe. Salvation. But then the thunder roared again, drowning it out, and I realized it was probably just the storm raging in triumph at my end. That night, lying on the edge of death, shivering so hard, my vision flickered black. I learned the final lesson pain came to teach me. Pain does not kill you quickly. It lingers, it devours, and in the end it whispers only one truth: you are alone. I don't know how long I lay there, half buried in mud and rain. Minutes, hours, time lost meaning as tremors racked my body in violent, uncontrollable waves. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw felt fractured. Every breath burned raw in my chest, scalding my lungs with the icy air. My vision flickered darkness, curling at the edges like burnt paper swallowing the world piece by piece. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. A broken girl discarded on the side of a forgotten road, washed away like a stain in the relentless rain. But then headlights. At first I thought I was hallucinating. The beams cut through the sheets of rain, slicing the storm open to reveal skeletal trees bending and trembling in the wind. I tried to lift my hand to reach for salvation, but my muscles refused. All I could do was lie there and watch as the light slowed, then stopped the engine, rumbling low like a promise against the thunder's wrath. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched through gravel and wet earth, urgent and fast. A shadow loomed above me, blocking the rain for a brief, blessed moment. My eyes fluttered, fighting to focus through tears and pain and darkness. All I saw was a silhouette. Broad shoulders, long coat whipping around strong legs, hood pulled low over a face I couldn't see. Then he crouched down beside me. "Hey, Aurora, it's okay. I've got you." That voice, rougher than I remembered, edged with exhaustion and years of unspoken pain, but I would have known it anywhere. My heart gave a painful lurch, something bright and sharp cracking open in my chest. Tears burned hot against my frozen skin, sliding down to mingle with rain and mud. "Jason." I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief and desperate hope. He pulled back his hood, and lightning lit up his face. Older, leaner jaw shadowed with rough stubble, deep lines carved by grief, and distance eyes dark with something that looked like regret. But it was him. My brother. The one who used to lift me onto his shoulders so I could pretend to touch the stars. The one who spun me around in the yard until we collapsed breathless in the grass, pointing out constellations through summer twilight. The one who vanished when I was 8, leaving behind only silence, confusion, and the endless question, why did he leave me? "It's me, little star," he said, his voice breaking like the storm above us. I'm here now." Strong arms slid under me, lifting my limp, trembling body out of the mud as if I weighed nothing. Against his chest, I felt warmth for the first time in hours. A warmth that seeped through my soaked sweater into bone and blood and soul. His scent, pine, wood smoke, rain filled my lungs, tearing a sob from somewhere deep inside me. "I thought you left me too," I gasped out, my tears turning into ragged sobs that shook my entire frame. Each word tasted like blood and grief. "Never," he whispered fiercely, pressing his lips to my forehead, his breath hot against my cold skin. "I never left you, Aurora. I couldn't get to you until now." He carried me to his truck, shielding me from the raging storm with his body. The heater blasted warm air, thawing my frozen limbs until feeling returned in painful tingles. He wrapped me in blankets that smelled of wood smoke, wool, and home. I felt him buckle me in his fingers, brushing wet hair from my face with heartbreaking gentleness, his touch trembling. "Stay awake for me, okay?" he said, his voice thick and shaking as he started the engine. "Just a little longer. Don't leave me again, little star." I tried. God, I tried. But exhaustion was an undertow dragging me down with relentless force. My eyelids fluttered too heavy to hold open. Through the haze, I heard his voice breaking and fierce all at once. "I've got you, Aurora Lane. I've always had you, and I promise you this, they will never touch you again. Never. Even if I have to burn this whole damn world to keep you safe." And for the first time in my life, in the freezing dark, half broken, half alive, cradled against his beating heart, I believed him. I let the darkness take me, knowing this time I wasn't falling alone. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was warmth. Real warmth seeping into bones that had known only cold. Heavy quilts cocooned me, their weight grounding me against the trembling of my fragile body. The sharp scent of pine mingled with old wood smoke, filling my lungs with something that felt like safety. My eyelids fluttered open to see thick wooden beams overhead, dark with age and shadow. For a moment I thought I was dead, that this was heaven, some quiet place beyond pain and betrayal. Then I saw him. Jason sat slumped in a battered armchair across the small cabin, elbows on his knees, head bowed. In the flickering orange firelight, he looked so much older than his 26 years, lean and hollow-cheeked, his flannel shirt torn at the sleeve, mud crusted on his jeans, his dark hair hanging in damp curls around his forehead. But when he lifted his head, when his eyes met mine, there it was, that same unbreakable softness, that same fierce, protective love I remembered from childhood. "Hey, little star," he said softly, his voice raw and cracking. "You're awake." Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and blinding. My lips trembled as I tried to speak, my voice breaking on words I had held back for over a decade. How are you here? You left. You never came back." A shadow crossed his face, the kind of darkness that pain carves deep into a man's bones. He took a shaky breath, his shoulders tightening as if bracing for impact. "Dad kicked me out, Aurora. I didn't leave you. I left them." Confusion sliced through my exhaustion, sharp enough to clear the haze of painkillers in my veins. "Why?" I whispered. His jaw clenched so tight I heard his teeth grind. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then his voice came out low and ragged. "You were 14. The doctors said there was a specialist in Boston who could slow the progression of your disease. Dad refused, said it was too expensive, that God's will wasn't something we could fight. I offered my college fund, every cent I'd saved since I was 12. He lost it, said I was undermining him, humiliating him in front of Mom. That night he told me if I walked out that door, I was dead to him." A tear slid down his cheek, catching in the rough stubble on his jaw. He didn't bother to wipe it away. Instead, he looked at me with eyes so full of grief and love, it felt like drowning in warmth after so many years of ice. I spent the next few years on the streets, shelters, day labor, construction sites. I learned to survive because I had to, but every day, every freezing night on a park bench or caved up in some half-finished house, I thought about you, about the little sister with fire in her eyes and tremors in her hands who dreamed of being an astronomer so she could name the stars. He gestured around the small cabin's sturdy pine walls, iron stove glowing with coals, shelves lined with canned food blankets, medical supplies. I built this place with my own hands. Learned off-grid systems, solar panels, wilderness survival. I knew one day I'd have to disappear. For me. For you. Tears slipped sideways into my hair, soaking into the pillow beneath my head. My chest ached with grief so vast it felt like my ribs might splinter. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice shaking under the weight of horror and hope. His eyes darkened, shadowed with a fury so deep it terrified me. "I've been watching them for weeks. I saw the fundraiser pages, all the money people donated to save your life, and I saw the withdrawals. They drained your medical fund, every last cent. Then they reported you as a runaway. Told everyone you left voluntarily." Sobs ripped from my throat, shaking my entire body. "Why?" I gasped. "Why would they do that? Why would they?" Jason's lips curled into something like a snarl rage crackling in his low, trembling voice. "Because, little star, if you were a runaway, they couldn't be charged with abandonment. And if you died out there in the mud, in the rain, in some ditch where no one could find you, there would be no questions, no consequences." His words cut deeper than any scalpel slicing through flesh bone and every last shred of belief I still held about the people who gave me life. My parents hadn't just abandoned me. They had erased me, written me off as an inconvenience to be buried quietly beneath cold rain and rotting leaves. "But you're not gone," Jason whispered fiercely, leaning forward until his shadow fell over me, wrapping me in something fierce and unbreakable. He reached out, gripping my trembling hand between his rough, calloused fingers. "You're here? And I swear to you, Aurora Lane, they will pay for what they've done." In his eyes, burning with love, rage, and the resolve of a man who had walked through hell and clawed his way back out, I saw something I never thought I'd live long enough to see: a future. A future where I wasn't a burden to be discarded. A future where I wasn't a ghost haunting my family's house. A future where, for the first time, I was wanted simply because I existed. And in that moment, lying broken and half frozen under heavy quilts, my heart whispered a truth I had never dared to believe. I am not alone. Not anymore. I thought I had known betrayal. I thought being left to die on a rain-soaked roadside by the people who gave me life was the worst pain imaginable. But that night, sitting under dim lantern light in Jason's hidden cabin, the fire's embers flickering shadows against rough timber walls, I realized betrayal has layers. Some so deep they strip the marrow from your bones and leave behind only empty hollows where hope used to live. The leather-bound journal lay heavy in my trembling hands. Each page was a knife, each word a wound. Robert signed the paperwork today. Neurovance transferred $30,000 immediately. The doctor said Aurora would help save other children. Risks are minimal, he said. But when he looked at me, I saw something cold in his eyes. God forgive me. She was only 3. 3. I was only 3 years old when they sold me to Neurovance Pharmaceuticals. Sold me to become a living petri dish in a corporate lab that saw children as raw material. Jason sat beside me, fists clenched so tight. His knuckles were bloodless, his shoulders shaking with barely contained rage. Across from us, Mira Chen, the former military medic turned underground investigator who had become our unlikely ally, scrolled through confidential files on her encrypted tablet. Her jaw was set in that grim, unbreakable line I had come to recognize as fury restrained by discipline. We found her. Mira said, her voice low and taut as piano wire. She turned the screen toward us. Dr. Iris Monroe, lead researcher on Neurovance's Phase 3 neurological trials. Her hair was streaked gray now, her expression severe even in the blurred ID photo. She teaches under an alias at a private research college. But it's her. No question. Within hours, Jason arranged the meeting. In a secluded cafe outside town, its windows steamed against the winter drizzle. Dr. Monroe sat across from me, eyes ringed with exhaustion and something that looked like regret. There were 27 children in that trial, she whispered, her fingers trembling around a chipped porcelain mug. 24 sustained permanent neurological damage within 5 years. 2 others didn't survive childhood. She lifted her gaze to mine then, and I saw it, the guilt, the horror, the knowledge that no apology could ever reach the depth of her crimes. You're the only one left with cognitive function intact, she said, her voice breaking. You were never supposed to live this long. My breath caught in my chest. The world blurred and spun around me as nausea coiled tight in my stomach. Why would they do this to us? Her sorrow twisted into a sneer of disgust. Profit. They wanted to fast-track neural regeneration treatments for military contracts. Soldiers with traumatic brain injury, spinal damage. Your parents, they signed consent forms in exchange for quarterly payments. To them, it was a miracle cure. To Neurovance, it was a cheap trial. My vision blackened at the edges. 27 children. 24 lives crippled before they even began. 2 dead before they learned to write their names. And me, the final proof of their crime. The loose end they needed to sever to bury their secrets forever. So that's why. I whispered, tears sliding down my cheeks, hot and silent. That's why they left me there. If I died, everything would be buried with me. Jason's grip closed around my hand so tightly it hurt, grounding me against the rising tide of grief and horror. His voice came out hoarse, torn raw by rage and love in equal measure. No, little star. They tried to erase you, but you're still here, and now we expose them all. In that moment, between Dr. Monroe's shaking confession and Jason's trembling fury, something inside me shifted. For 17 years, I had been an experiment, a burden, a victim, but not anymore. Because betrayal cuts deep, but truth cuts deeper. And I would wield it like a blade. I was no longer their compliant subject, no longer the silent girl shaking in hospital hallways, no longer the discarded daughter left to drown in mud and storm. Now I would become their reckoning. That night, after Jason fell asleep in the old armchair by the stove, I sat alone with the journal heavy in my lap. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, casting the small cabin in shifting shadows. Outside, the rain hammered the tin roof like war drums, rattling the window panes with each gust of wind. The storm sounded furious, unrelenting, the sky screaming down its rage upon the earth. My trembling fingers turned to the last page, the paper stiff with age, the ink smudged by water damage, and what looked suspiciously like tears. My mother's neat handwriting wavered here, her once perfect loops jagged with guilt or fear or both. They told us she wouldn't live past adolescence anyway, that this way she'd serve a purpose. Charles said it was better than watching her rot away. I think I believed him. I think I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was that I am a monster. My chest tightened breath, coming in ragged, silent gasps. I pressed a hand to my sternum as if I could keep my ribs from caving in around my heart. My eyes flicked down to the final lines. Today she asked me why her hands shake. I told her it was because she was special. I lied. She's not special. She's just useful. For a moment, the words didn't register. They floated on the page, black scratches without meaning. Then the meaning hit like a blade, sliding between my ribs slow and deep, until all I could do was stare at the journal as tears spilled soundlessly down my cheeks. I dropped the journal to the floor. The thud echoed in the silent room louder than thunder. My hands flew to my mouth to muffle the scream that tore up from my chest, my shoulders heaving as silent sobs racked my body. Lightning split the night sky outside, illuminating the room in stark white flashes, revealing me curled on the floorboards, hair plastered to my tear-streaked face, shaking with grief too large to contain. All those years, every hug, every kiss pressed to my forehead, every whispered, "I love you," every gentle smoothing of my hair when my tremors grew too violent, all of it nothing but a smokescreen to hide the rot beneath. A disguise for betrayal so profound it ripped apart the very fabric of who I thought I was. My own mother, the woman who carried me in her body, who felt my first kicks beneath her ribs, had bartered my life for mortgage payments and a fleeting taste of middle-class comfort. She sold my future so she could hold her head high at PTA meetings, so she could serve store-bought pies on holiday china and pretend we were a normal, loving family. The rain pounded harder, roaring against the roof, but the real storm was inside me. A tempest of grief so deep it hollowed out my soul, ripping everything soft and human from its walls and leaving nothing behind but rage. Rage so pure it burned away the pain. Rage so deep it remade me in its image. My body shook with it, my fingernails digging half-moons into my palms as lightning illuminated the journal lying open on the floorboards, its final confession screaming up at me in my mother's beautiful handwriting. And in the quiet that followed, as the thunder rolled away into distant hills and the rain softened to a steady, mournful patter, I knew with a clarity so cold it felt like steel in my veins. My mother didn't just betray me. She ended me before my life ever began. The envelope was plain, unmarked, no name, no return address, just a thin slip of paper inside folded once, waiting to shatter what fragile calm we'd managed to build. My hands trembled as I ripped it open, the rain lashing against the cabin windows like 1,000 clawed fingers. Thunder rumbled overhead, shaking the rafters as if the sky itself warned of what I was about to read. Jason watched me from across the scarred pine table, his jaw clenched so tight I saw the muscle twitch near his temple. His dark eyes burned with dread. I unfolded the paper, breath hitching, as my eyes scanned the single line typed in stark black font. "You were never meant to survive. Stop digging." For a moment the words didn't register. They floated on the page, cold and detached, as if they belonged to someone else's nightmare. Then meaning hit a hammer blow to my chest, forcing the breath from my lungs. I read it again, and again, until the letters blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Jason snatched the letter from my fingers, his gaze flicking over the words, his entire body going still in that terrifying way it always did before violence erupted. Without a word, he strode to the far wall and pressed his palm against the false pantry shelf. It swung open to reveal flickering security monitors and encrypted comms. He stabbed out a text with practiced speed. Minutes later, Mira Chen burst through the cabin door, soaked to the bone rifle slung across her chest. Her eyes swept the room, assessing my shaking form before narrowing on Jason. "What is it?" she demanded, voice like ice cracking underfoot. He shoved the letter into her hands. "They know where we are." Mira's jaw tightened. She moved to the monitors, her fingers flying across the controls with soldier's precision. Feed after feed flickered past until she froze the grainy footage. There. A dark sedan idling at the edge of the property line. A figure stepping out into the rain hood, drawn low face obscured by shadows. They moved with calm efficiency, placing something at the door before melting back into the tree line. My skin crawled with invisible insects, every nerve ending sparking with terror. They're watching us. Jason's fist slammed down onto the table with a force that rattled the old lanterns hanging from the beams. The entire cabin seemed to vibrate with his fury. "No more running," he growled, voice low and lethal. "We strike first." Mira nodded sharply, her expression carved from stone. "We move tonight. Leak the documents to trusted contacts. Back up everything to multiple dead drops. If they come for us, the truth goes public." Outside, thunder cracked so loud it shook dust from the rafters. The rain pounded the tin roof, drowning out my ragged breaths. Inside the storm was us. Jason's eyes met mine across the dim glow of the lantern, wild and terrified and resolute all at once. "They tried to erase you once," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of memory and rage. "But this time, Aurora, we erase them." I looked down at the letter still trembling in my hand, felt the heat of the lantern on my damp skin, tasted the copper tang of my own fear. And then somewhere deep beneath the terror, something rose in me. Not fear, not grief, but a lethal burning clarity. Let them come. I would not die silent in the dark. I would not be erased like an inconvenient statistic. I would not let their secrets drown my voice. This time, they would learn their experiment survived, and she had teeth. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay curled on the thin mattress in the corner of the cabin, the rough wool blanket pulled to my chin, listening to the wind lash the pine trees outside like an army of wraiths clawing at the walls. Each gust rattled the tin roof and made the lantern flicker, casting tall, twitching shadows across the ceiling beams stained with decades of wood smoke. Jason paced the floor, silent, except for the slow creak of old boards beneath his boots. Back and forth like a caged predator, waiting for dawn. Mira sat at the battered table, disassembling and cleaning her pistol with methodical precision, her movements as smooth and efficient as breathing. The metallic clicks of springs and chambers sounded like distant clockwork, counting down to something none of us could name. I clutched the warning letter to my chest, the paper damp with sweat and tears. "You were never meant to survive. Stop digging." The words throbbed against my ribs like a second poisonous heartbeat, coiling around my lungs until breathing felt like swallowing glass. In that darkness, as thunder grumbled beyond the trees and rain whispered across the metal roof like funeral shrouds dragging over stone, a truth settled over me, heavier than any blanket. They didn't fear me dying. They feared me living. Because a dead girl is a tragedy to bury quietly. A file closed a name, forgotten, an unmarked grave washed away by time. But a living girl, a girl who remembers, who exposes, who refuses to bow her head, she is a reckoning. She is a blade honed by betrayal, and rage pointed straight at their throats. Jason stopped pacing. He crouched beside my mattress, his shadow falling over me, his scent of pine and gun oil filling my senses. Gently, he brushed damp hair from my face, his rough, calloused thumb catching a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "We go at dawn," he whispered, his voice trembling with fear and purpose in equal measure. "Mira and I will handle the extraction. You stay close. You don't look back. You hear me, little star?" I knotted my throat too tight to speak. If I tried, only a broken sob would come out. He pressed his forehead to mine, eyes squeezed shut. I felt the tremor in his breath, the silent prayer he couldn't voice. "They think they've hunted us to ground," he growled softly, his words vibrating against my skin. "But tomorrow we hunt them." Mira glanced up briefly from her reassembly, her gaze hard and cold, nodding once in silent agreement before she returned to her weapon, sliding each piece into place with clicks that sounded like finality. In the silent hours before dawn, as Mira loaded magazines and Jason plotted routes into darkness on a hand-drawn map, I lay staring at the cracked ceiling beams above me. No prayers passed my lips, no hope for mercy bloomed in my chest. I had nothing left to pray to, nothing left to hope for from a world that had eaten me alive and called it sacrifice. Only a single vow, cold and silent, an absolute repeating in my mind with every fading throb of my failing body. If I am to die tomorrow, I will die screaming the truth in their faces. And if I live, I will burn their empire to ash. It happened at dawn. One moment, Jason was there whispering plans into Mira's ear while I sipped bitter coffee, trying to calm the trembling in my hands. The next, red and blue lights bled through the dense forest, flashing across the cabin walls like a silent scream. Sirens split apart the morning stillness, shaking birds from the trees in frantic bursts of wings. Jason ran to the window, his curse dying on his lips as armed officers poured into the clearing, rifles, raised tactical vests gleaming wet under the rising sun. Jason Lane, the lead officer, shouted, voice amplified by a bullhorn echoing through the pines. "Step out with your hands where we can see them." His eyes found mine across the dim cabin, wide with fear, but blazing with something deeper resolve. A silent message passed between us in that instant, sharper than words. "Stay alive. Don't fight them." I whispered, my voice ragged, strangled by terror. "Please." He raised his hand slowly, deliberately stepping forward with calm dignity, even as they tackled him into the mud. His knees hit the wet earth with a dull thud, zip ties biting into his wrists as two officers pinned his shoulders. "It's okay, little star," he called out softly, his voice breaking as they dragged him to his feet. "Stay strong." Mira's grip clamped onto my shoulder, forcing me back as my legs gave way. My vision blurred with tears and the bright flash of rotating sirens. They charged him with identity fraud and obstruction. She spat, her voice shaking with rage. "It's bullshit. Pure intimidation. They're trying to cut off your protection." After they shoved Jason into the patrol SUV and drove him away down the narrow gravel road, Mira wasted no time. She bundled me into her rusted pickup, her jaw set so tight it looked carved from granite. The ride was silent, except for the drumming rain and my quiet sobs. She took me to the storage unit Jason had told her about days before his last insurance policy. The stale air inside smelled of rust and secrets. Rows of neatly labeled folders lined the metal shelves. Flash drives glimmered under her flashlight's beam. A thin stack of legal documents sat on top of an army duffel bag. My name glared up at me from the top page, "Petition for Emancipation, Aurora Lane." Beside it, a folded scrap of lined paper, Jason's scrawled handwriting barely legible in the flickering light, "Freedom first." Then justice. "Burn them down, little star." My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped it. Mira knelt beside me, her cold fingers steadying mine as she helped sift through the evidence, financial records showing every payment from Neurovance to Charles and Margaret Lane. internal trial data from Dr. Iris Monroe proving I had been part of an illegal human experiment on unconsenting minors. Hospital forms documenting my neurological deterioration ignored or falsified to protect corporate contracts and quarterly bonuses. That night, we hid in a cramped motel room lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like trapped hornets. Mira sat at the peeling laminate desk, fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. Her face glowed blue in the screen light, eyes blazing with fury and grim determination. "We go public tomorrow," she said without looking up. "I've secured a press conference slot. You're going to speak Aurora." Fear coiled cold and tight in my chest, tightening until I could barely draw breath. "I can't." "You have to," she snapped, then her voice softened, cracking around the edges. "He gave up his freedom so you could have yours. Don't waste it." The next morning, cameras flashed as I wheeled onto the small stage outside a federal courthouse, the sky heavy with storm clouds threatening to break. I felt their eyes on me, hundreds of reporters, bystanders, and silent onlookers holding their breath. My voice cracked at first, but anger steadied it. Truth gave it weight. My name is Aurora Lane. I was sold at 3 years old by Charles and Margaret Lane to Neurovance Pharmaceuticals for illegal human experimentation. When I didn't die, they abandoned me. And when I survived that, they tried to silence me again. I held up Jason's handwritten note, letting the cameras capture each trembling letter. My brother believed the truth would set me free. He was wrong. I raised my eyes, scanning the sea of reporters frozen in horrified silence, their pens still, their cameras blinking red. The truth doesn't set you free. It sets you on fire. And from these flames, I will build justice. Within hours, justice for Aurora trended across every platform. My story spread like blood spilled in water, drawing sharks from every network, every legal firm, every advocacy group that had once ignored me. But for the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the storm. That night, the motel room felt too small to contain my rage. The ceiling hummed with flickering fluorescent light, buzzing like trapped wasps above me, casting fractured shadows across the peeling wallpaper. The stale air smelled of cheap detergent and something metallic beneath it. Old blood, old grief, old ghosts that never left these walls. Mira slept in the chair by the door, her pistol holstered at her side, her head resting against cracked plaster. Even in sleep, her hand twitched near the weapon, a soldier's reflex burned too deep to ever fade. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, her jaw slack with exhaustion, but every line of her body remained taut, ready to spring at the slightest sound. I sat curled on the thin mattress knees, tucked to my chest, clutching Jason's note so tightly it crumpled in my fist. "Burn them down, little star." The words pulsed through my veins louder than my own heartbeat, vibrating in my bones like war drums, calling me to battle. I closed my eyes and saw him alone in a cold jail cell under buzzing fluorescent lights, just like these wrists bruised and eyes hollow from sleeplessness and defeat. I saw Charles and Margaret Lane sleeping peacefully in their pristine suburban house, silk sheets pulled up to their chins, the scent of money and deception clinging to their skin. I saw Neurovance towering over the city, glass and steel rising into dawn, like sharpened blades, corporate logos gleaming over streets slick with rain temples, built on the bones of 27 children whose names no one remembered but me. I unfolded the petition for emancipation again, tracing the letters of my name printed across the top. Aurora Lane, my freedom. My final severance from the people who called me daughter but treated me like defective merchandise sold at discount. A single tear slipped down my cheek, warm and silent. Not from grief that had long since burned away, but from fury so bright it seared my throat raw. I pressed Jason's note to my lips, tasting the paper, tasting his last promise to me, tasting my own resolve. I whispered into the stale motel air, my voice shaking with purpose that tasted like prophecy. Tomorrow I become something they never imagined, not their broken experiment, not their silent victim. Tomorrow I become their reckoning. Outside thunder rolled low across the city, rattling the thin window glass in its frame. The sky flickered with silent lightning, illuminating the cracked parking lot and distant highways beyond. A storm was coming. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Because this time, I wasn't the girl left trembling in hospital beds. I wasn't the child thrown away in the mud. I wasn't the file marked "failed trial terminated." This time, I was the storm. The studio lights burned hot against my skin, bright enough to turn sweat into a gleaming confession sliding down my neck. The tremors in my hands intensified under the weight of 100 cameras pointed at me like rifles. Every lens gleamed cold and unblinking, capturing the precise moment my truth split open the world they had built on my silence. The interviewer, a polished woman with flawless hair and eyes as merciless as scalpels, leaned forward, her voice dripping with carefully contained disbelief. "Aurora Lane, are you saying your parents knowingly sold you for medical experimentation at 3 years old?" I glanced down at the folder in my lap. Jason's folder, heavy with every damning receipt, contract, and falsified hospital record. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the quiet studio hum. But his words anchored me bright and sharp. Freedom first, then justice. Burn them down, little star. With trembling fingers, I flipped open the folder and pulled out the Neurovance trial agreement, the signature line glowing under studio lights like a brand burned into my flesh. I held it up for every watching eye to see. "This is the contract," I said, my voice low but unshaking. "Signed by Charles and Margaret Lane when I was 3 years old. They sold me to Neurovance Pharmaceuticals for $400,000 in exchange for my body as a testing ground." A gasp rippled across the studio audience, an exhale of collective horror that echoed into millions of living rooms nationwide. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I set the folder aside, feeling its absence like the lifting of chains. My hands curled around the armrests of my wheelchair so tight my nails bit crescents into the cracked vinyl. Off camera, I heard Mira's sharp inhale, saw her silhouette shift forward. The interviewer's mouth fell open slightly as she realized what I was about to do. Slowly, agonizingly, I pressed my feet against the cold studio floor. The pain flared like lightning up my wasted legs, electric agony that nearly blinded me. My knees buckled. My body shook so violently I thought I might collapse in front of the entire nation. But I stood. Tears blurred my vision as I raised my chin, forcing my eyes to find the cameras. My voice came out ragged, cracking under the weight of everything they had tried to take from me, but defiant. This is what fighting back looks like. This is what they couldn't take from me. My will to stand up. Silence fell over the studio. A silence so deep it felt holy, vibrating through my bones with something close to redemption. Then the room erupted, gasps, sobs, frantic camera shutters, capturing the moment I became something no longer broken, no longer hunted. I became hope. That night, Neurovance stock collapsed, wiping billions from their valuation within hours. The Department of Justice announced a full criminal investigation into the corporation's human trials. Charles and Margaret Lane were arrested at dawn, charged with felony child endangerment fraud and conspiracy. Their accounts were frozen, their assets seized, their pristine suburban kingdom reduced to rubble in a single morning. As I watched the news crawl across every channel, names and charges, scrolling over footage of my parents led away in handcuffs, Mira sat beside me in the motel room. She squeezed my hand so tight it anchored me to the earth. Her eyes were red tears carving tracks down her weathered cheeks, but her voice was steady as iron. "You did it, Aurora," she whispered. "You burned them down." But as the world outside roared with justice and outrage, I sat staring at my reflection in the cracked motel mirror. I saw my thin, trembling body wrapped in a thrift store sweater. I saw the haunted shadows under my eyes, the tremors still rippling down my arms. and I realized something deeper than victory, something truer than revenge. This wasn't triumph. This wasn't conquest. This was rebirth. Because from the ashes of their empire, I would rise, not just to survive, but to become their reckoning and my own salvation. That night, the motel room was silent except for the low hum of the broken mini fridge and Mira's quiet rhythmic breathing from the armchair by the door. Outside, the neon vacancy sign flickered on and off, bleeding sickly red light through the threadbare curtains. Shadows pulsed across the ceiling like ghosts. My legs throbbed with every pulse beat, raw pain radiating up my spine, each breath dragging sharp edges through my chest. Hours earlier, I had stood on live television, the weight of a nation's eyes pressing down on trembling bones that barely held me upright. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt powerful, unstoppable, reborn. But instead, I sat alone on the edge of the narrow bed, staring down at my hands curled in my lap, shaking so hard they blurred in my vision. My phone screen glowed beside me, vibrating endlessly with notifications. Justice for Aurora, stand-up survivor, Neurovance exposed, millions of strangers praising my courage, my strength, my defiance. Their comments poured in like rain. You're an inspiration, you're so strong, you're a hero, but none of them saw the truth burned under my skin. That strength was born from terror. That courage was just another word for desperation. That standing up felt like dying on my feet. In the dim light, I pulled Jason's crumpled note from my pocket, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers until his scrawled words sharpened into focus. Burn them down, little star. Hot tears slid silently down my cheeks, falling onto the ink until the letters blurred into dark smudges. My chest clenched with grief so vast it felt like an ocean collapsing inward. Jason was still in his cell, alone, bruised, shackled under fluorescent lights that buzzed like locusts, waiting for the justice I had promised him with shaking hands and breaking voice. Outside, the neon signs hummed their electric lullaby over empty streets slick with midnight rain. Their colors, red, blue, gold, rippled across the dark window glass like bruises blooming under pale skin. In their glow, I whispered into the silent room, my voice raw and shaking, with a promise carved from bone and blood. I did it, Jason. I burned them down. But I'm not done. I won't be done until you're free, too. The fridge hummed on. Mira shifted in her sleep, her hand brushing the grip of her pistol. The world beyond the curtains turned toward dawn, inch by inch, dragging its cold light closer. Exhaustion wrapped around me like chains, dragging at every tendon and ligament until I thought I might fold in half and never rise again. But under that crushing weight, something pulsed hot and alive within me, bright as lightning in a hurricane, sharp as truth spoken aloud. A truth forged in agony. I did not stand up today to be remembered. I stood up today to become unstoppable. 6 months later, autumn arrived early in the forest surrounding Jason's sanctuary. The maple leaves flamed gold and crimson, drifting down to carpet the winding pathways we had carved through tangled undergrowth. Each morning, Mira brewed bitter herbal tea in the small kitchen, her quiet movement steady and precise, while Jason chopped firewood outside, his silhouette strong and familiar against the pale misted dawn. My legs remain fragile. Some days they carry me from the cabin to the garden without trembling, allowing me to touch the late-blooming asters and breathe in their faint sweetness. Other days I collapse before I reach the porch steps, my body screaming its reminders of damage done and debts unpaid. But each day, I rise. I spend my mornings sorting the legal documents stacked in neat columns across the long oak table Jason built by hand. Survivor testimonies, pro bono contracts, class action petitions. The files arrive daily now, sent by those Neurovance harmed, those abandoned by the same systems meant to protect them. We named it the Wells Foundation, not for Charles or Margaret, but for what wells truly mean, places that hold life. Places that sustain hope. Places you return to when the world is too dry to survive alone. In the afternoons, I sit by the wide window overlooking the forest. Sunlight filters through pine boughs, dappling the wooden floors with shifting patterns of gold and green. Here I read letters from strangers, disabled girls who whisper that seeing me stand changed their understanding of strength, of beauty, of survival itself. Their words land deeper than praise. They are reminders that I am no longer merely alive. I am awake. Neurovance executives await trial, each new leak adding another chain to their downfall. My parents lost everything, their wealth, their home, their illusion of moral superiority shattered under the weight of national disgust. Jason's charges were dropped once my testimony exposed the conspiracy that tried to erase us both. One night, under a harvest moon so bright it painted the forest in silvered shadows, I sat beside Jason on the porch steps. He strummed his old guitar, softly broken strings replaced with mismatched wires. The notes rose into the crisp night air, like prayers trembling at the edges before dissolving into silence. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly, my breath fogging in the chill. The question tasted of old wounds. He didn't look up from the strings. Regret what? Burning it all down? Walking away from normal life to save me? Jason paused, his fingers hovering over the final chord. The music stilled. Then he turned to me, his gaze steady and bright as moonlight reflected on dark water. "I didn't burn it down for you, little star." His voice was low, but it vibrated in my chest like a vow. "I burned it down so you could rise from the ashes yourself." Tears blurred the moon into a glowing smear of light. I reached out and took his hand in mine, feeling the rough scars across his knuckles, marks of every battle fought and survived to bring us here. And in that quiet, under the silent witness of pine and moon and frost-silvered earth, I understood I was never their burden. I was their reckoning. I was never their broken daughter. I was the wildfire they couldn't contain. As dawn approached, brushing the horizon in pale rose and gold, I whispered a final promise into the cold, listening forest air. They tried to bury me. They forgot I was a seed. And as the sun rose over Jason's sanctuary, pouring light through the autumn trees in shafts of brilliance, I felt it. Not hope, not forgiveness, but something deeper, something truer. Freedom. That night I stepped barefoot onto the damp grass outside the cabin. The earth was cold beneath my feet, dew soaking into my skin, grounding me in the quiet darkness. Above me, the stars burned silent and distant, scattered across the black expanse like shards of shattered glass caught in moonlight. The moon hung low on the horizon, swollen and golden, casting its soft glow across the clearing where Jason's tools lay forgotten, and Mira's training mats rested under the porch awning, still holding the ghosts of her morning drills. I tilted my face to the sky, breathing in the scent of pine sap and moss-damp earth. The scars on my legs throbbed in the chill night air. My muscles trembled with each careful breath, the ache deep in my bones, whispering of damage done, pain endured. But for the first time, the pain felt honest, like the echo of battles survived rather than wounds still open. I thought of that rain-soaked road where my parents left me to die, the mud sucking at my cheek, the taste of blood and rain in my mouth, the tremors that stole my voice, my dignity, my plea for mercy. The headlights disappearing into the storm, leaving only darkness and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I closed my eyes and whispered to the silent sky, my words burning their shape into the dark. Someone once left me on the side of the road to die. Now I'm the one changing lives and bringing down empires. A shooting star sliced across the heavens above me, its light sharp and silent, unstoppable as truth spoken aloud. I lowered my gaze back to the cabin. Warm light spilled through its curtained windows, golden against the deep indigo of night. Inside, Jason sat hunched over his laptop at the heavy oak table, maps and legal filings spread before him like a general's battle plans. His face glowed with determination, shadows deep under his tired eyes. In the small kitchen, Mira Chen moved quietly between the stove and counter, brewing her bitter herbal tea that smelled of burned rosemary, and hope her movements precise and silent, a ritual of grounding she performed each night. For a moment, I stood there watching them through the window pane, feeling the warmth of their presence even from the cold yard. Jason, my brother, my protector, my mirror of pain and resilience. Mira, my mentor, my anchor, the steel that sharpened my own. My family, not of blood, but of battle, of choice, of truth. And in that silent moonlit moment with the scars on my legs singing their quiet, painful hymn, I realized something deeper than survival, something truer than victory. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was truly alive. Alive in the ache of healing muscles, alive in the sting of old wounds learning to close, alive in the steady thrum of rage turned to purpose, alive in the love that asked nothing but truth in return. I turned away from the stars, away from the memories of mud and headlights and silence. I stepped back toward the cabin, toward the people waiting inside, toward the light that spilled across the grass to meet me. And with each slow, trembling step, I whispered to myself, I am here. I am alive, and I am not afraid anymore. The world sees me now as a survivor, a fighter, a girl who burned empires to the ground. But they will never see the nights I woke screaming or the days I collapsed sobbing on cold wooden floors. They will never hear the words that haunted me, "You're a burden." And they will never understand that those words forged the weapon I became. Because in the end, it wasn't kindness that saved me. It was rage turned into purpose. It was betrayal turned into legacy. It was pain turned into power. I was left to die under a storm. Now I am the storm. Thank you for walking this dark and painful journey with me. For every light comment and silent tear shed as you read these words. Stories like mine are heavy to carry, but together we turn sorrow into strength, fear into understanding, and silence into a roar that can never be ignored. If this touched something deep inside, you share it. If you're still standing, despite your scars, know this: you are not alone. Thank you for listening to my truth. Until next time, stay unbreakable.